Snow mixed with blood on the cabin steps as a pregnant woman collapsed into a retired Navy SEAL's arms. Ryan Carter thought his days of fighting for lives were long behind him, but one desperate knock in the middle of a Montana blizzard changed everything. Before sunrise, he would help bring a baby into the world, stand between killers and an innocent family, and face 700 bikers who believed he had taken the one person they loved most. Before we begin, please let me know where you are watching from. Thank you. Snow buried the Montana mountains under a moonless sky, and the forest around Ryan Carter's cabin seemed to hold its breath. At 35, Ryan Carter had the kind of presence that made people lower their voices without knowing why. He was a tall, muscular former Navy SEAL with broad shoulders, a powerful chest, healthy light skin, gray-blue eyes, a short, dark brown military haircut, and a neatly trimmed beard that sharpened his strong, square jaw. He always dressed as if part of him still expected a call from a world he had left behind. A green military-style long-sleeve shirt with camouflage sleeves, camouflage military pants, a black fabric belt, and old black military boots scarred by years of rough ground. To strangers, his face looked bright and trustworthy. To anyone who had seen real grief, there was also something older in his eyes, something quiet and heavy, as if his soul had learned to walk with ghosts and simply stopped complaining about their company. The cabin was not large, but it was solid, built from dark pine logs on a shoulder of land overlooking a frozen valley. Inside, a stone fireplace glowed with orange light, warming shelves of canned food, a hand-built table, 2 worn chairs, and a faded rug where Max lay with his head on his paws. Max was Ryan's 6-year-old male German shepherd, a large, muscular dog with a black and tan coat, a black back and muzzle, dark tan chest and legs, amber eyes, upright ears, and a plain black collar. He had the noble patience of an old soldier and the comic habit of sighing like a disappointed grandfather whenever Ryan forgot to share bacon. Most nights, that little sound was the only laughter in the cabin. Ryan had chosen the mountains after the Navy because quiet places did not ask questions. They did not ask why a man woke before dawn, with his hand clenched around memories. They did not ask why he kept his boots by the door, or why he slept lightly, even when no enemy stood within 1,000 miles. He had told himself that solitude was peace, yet some evenings, when the wind moved through the pines like a choir of tired spirits, he wondered if peace was only loneliness, wearing a better coat. Max always seemed to know when that thought came. The dog would lift his head, stare at Ryan with those amber eyes, and make one soft huff, as if reminding him that self-pity was useless unless served with steak. That night, the storm grew worse after midnight. Snow struck the windows in hard white bursts, and the old roof groaned beneath the weight of winter. Ryan sat near the fire with a mug of black coffee cooling beside him, reading the same page of a paperback for the 3rd time, without absorbing a word. He had been thinking about the supply road, about whether he should clear the fallen pine near the bend in the morning, about nothing important, and everything he could not forget. Then Max raised his head from the rug. The movement was small, but it changed the entire room. The lazy warmth disappeared from his posture, his ears angled toward the front door, and a low, warning growl rolled from his chest. Ryan did not speak. In his old life, men survived by respecting the smallest changes in the air, and Max had never been wrong about danger. He set the book down, stood slowly, and listened. At first there was only the storm beating against the cabin, but then something struck the front door with a dull, desperate thud. Ryan crossed the room while Max moved beside him, silent now, every muscle ready. The second impact came weaker than the first, followed by a sound that did not belong to the wilderness, a woman's broken cry, thin and terrified beneath the wind. When Ryan opened the door, the storm threw a body into his arms. She was young, perhaps 28, with long blonde hair frozen in wet strands against her cheeks, and a face made almost colorless by cold and blood loss. She was slender, except for the unmistakable curve of late pregnancy beneath a torn maternity shirt and an oversized black leather jacket. Her skin was fair, her lips blue, and her eyes, when they opened for half a second, were the blue-gray of a winter lake cracking under pressure. She had the look of someone who had been beautiful before terror got its hands on her. More than that, she had the look of a mother trying to keep her child alive by sheer will. "Please," she whispered, fingers closing weakly around Ryan's sleeve. "They're coming." Ryan carried her inside and kicked the door shut against the storm. Max circled once, sniffed the blood, then took position near the window as though some ancient guardian had stepped into his bones. Ryan laid the woman on blankets beside the fire and began working with the controlled urgency of a man who had seen bodies fail in every possible way. Her jacket was soaked through, her arms marked with cuts from shattered glass, and a deep wound along her right side bled steadily beneath torn fabric. It looked like she had crawled through snow after a crash, maybe more than a mile, while carrying a child who should have been safe in a warm bed somewhere. Ryan pressed a clean dressing over the wound and spoke in a low, steady voice, not because words could erase pain, but because panic was a thief, and he refused to let it steal what strength she had left. Her name, she managed to tell him, was Chloe Callahan. She said it with the faint hesitation of someone who knew the name carried trouble. Chloe was not hard or reckless like the jacket suggested. She was soft-spoken, frightened, and young enough that the wedding ring on her hand seemed almost too bright for the nightmare wrapped around her. Between shivers, she told Ryan that a black SUV had followed her down the mountain road after her prenatal appointment. At first she had thought it was just another vehicle trapped in the storm, but then it came closer, too close, its headlights filling her mirrors like the eyes of a hunting animal. When the road narrowed near the ridge, the SUV rammed her once, then again, until her car spun through the guardrail and plunged into the trees. Ryan asked who would do that to a pregnant woman, though part of him already understood that evil rarely needed a reasonable excuse. Chloe's hand moved over her belly, and her expression folded inward, with a fear deeper than pain. "They weren't after my purse," she said, voice trembling. "They wanted my baby gone." The words chilled the room more than the storm outside. Ryan had heard threats in many forms, from men with flags on their shoulders and men with money in their pockets, but nothing felt as vile as a war declared against an unborn child. He looked down at the oversized leather jacket and noticed the patch on the back for the first time. A winged skull, stitched in bold thread, the kind of symbol people recognized even if they pretended not to. Chloe saw his eyes change. Shame, dread, and desperate hope passed across her pale face all at once. "My husband is Tommy Callahan," she whispered. "He leads the Iron Saints Motorcycle Club." Ryan knew enough about the West to know the name. Tommy Callahan was spoken of in diners, gas stations, and sheriff's offices with the same uneasy respect people gave to lightning: dangerous, unpredictable, impossible to ignore. Ryan also knew that men like Tommy made enemies, and those enemies did not always strike at the man himself. Sometimes they found the wife driving alone through a snowstorm. Sometimes they aimed for the cradle before the child had even seen daylight. Before Chloe could say more, Max stopped looking at the window and turned fully toward the front of the cabin. His growl deepened, no longer uncertain, no longer questioning. Ryan rose and moved beside him, careful not to disturb the curtain more than necessary. Through the white chaos beyond the glass, two headlights appeared between the pines. They moved slowly up the narrow road, stopping once, then rolling forward again with the deliberate patience of hunters following blood in the snow. Behind Ryan, Chloe tried to sit up, but pain dragged her back down, and in a voice small enough to break something inside him, she whispered, "They found me." Ryan Carter did not move the curtain more than an inch, but it was enough to see the headlights crawling through the storm like pale wolves. The black SUV was still a good distance from the cabin, slowed by the steep grade and the thickening snow, yet its direction left no room for doubt. Whoever sat behind that windshield knew Chloe had come this way. Ryan let the curtain fall back into place and turned toward the room with the same controlled calm that had once steadied younger men in darker places than Montana. Chloe watched him from the blankets near the fire, her face ashen, one hand pressed over the curve of her stomach, as if her body alone could shield the child from the evil climbing the mountain. Max stood between them and the door, his black and tan frame tense, amber eyes fixed forward, a low growl still trembling in his chest. "Listen to me carefully," Ryan said, his voice quiet enough not to carry beyond the walls. "You are not going to panic, and you are not going to move unless I tell you to." Chloe looked younger in that moment, almost girlish beneath the blood and snow, but there was a stubborn thread of courage in her blue-gray eyes. She nodded once, though her lips shook from cold, fear, and pain. Ryan dragged a heavy quilt over her, added 2 thick logs to the fireplace, then moved with swift precision through the cabin. He shut the damper halfway so the fire would keep burning without throwing too much light, pulled wool blankets across the windows, and wiped the muddy blood trail near the entry with an old towel. It was not perfect. Nothing about the night was perfect. But survival had never required perfection. It required seconds, decisions, and the mercy of God when both ran thin. The SUV stopped somewhere beyond the tree line. Ryan heard the engine before he saw the men, a low mechanical rumble under the scream of the wind. Max shifted closer to the door, and Ryan placed one hand briefly on the dog's head, not to restrain him, but to remind them both that control mattered more than fury. Chloe tried to speak, but a sharp pain bent her body and stole the words from her mouth. Ryan looked at her stomach, then at her face. Her breathing had changed. The injury and the crash had already weakened her, but something new was happening now, something that tightened the room around them. "Chloe," he asked, kneeling beside her, "when did the cramping start?" And she swallowed hard and shook her head, as if denial could bargain with nature. "After the crash. It wasn't like this before." Ryan's jaw tightened. He had patched wounds in deserts, jungles, and ruined streets, but he knew enough to fear a baby arriving too early in a cabin during a manhunt. A knock struck the door. It was not desperate like Chloe's had been. It was patient, almost polite, and somehow that made it worse. Ryan rose and angled his body so Chloe could not be seen from the entry. Max remained silent now, which told Ryan the dog understood the game had changed. When Ryan opened the door only a narrow space, 2 men stood on the porch under the slashing snow. The first was tall and narrow, with slick black hair plastered against his forehead, pale skin, a trimmed mustache, and sharp eyes that moved too quickly over the doorway, the floorboards, and Ryan's boots. He wore an expensive dark coat, far too clean for a mountain road, and his smile had the thin, polished emptiness of a man used to lying for money. The second man was heavier, with a square jaw, thick neck, shaved head, and a dark bruise-colored scar under his left eye. He kept one hand inside his coat, and though he said nothing, his stare carried the dull cruelty of someone who enjoyed being feared. "Evening," the tall man said, voice smooth despite the storm. "Sorry to bother you, sir. We had a vehicle go off the road down below. Pregnant woman, blonde, probably scared out of her mind. We're trying to help her." Ryan let his shoulders sag a little and gave them the look of a tired mountain recluse dragged from his fire at the worst hour imaginable. "Only woman I've seen tonight is on a coffee can in my kitchen," he said. "And she's been disappointing me for years." Under other circumstances, it might have been funny. The tall man's smile did not change, but the scarred man's eyes dipped toward the porch, where the storm had failed to erase one faint reddish smear near the threshold. Ryan saw him notice it. He also saw Max step into the shadow behind him, just far enough for the men to hear a deep warning growl from inside, without seeing the dog clearly. The tall man pointed his flashlight toward the stain. "That blood?" Ryan did not look down. Looking would have been guilt. "Deer," he said. "Hit one with the truck yesterday. Montana roads collect more blood than churches collect casseroles." The scarred man shifted closer, his boots creaking on the snow-covered porch. "Mind if we look inside?" Ryan's expression changed only slightly, but the air around him hardened. "I do mind," he said. "This is private property, and that storm is the only thing keeping me polite." For a long second, the men stared at him, weighing age against posture, isolation against risk. Then Max released a thunderous bark from the darkness of the room, so sudden and powerful that even the scarred man flinched. Somewhere deeper inside the cabin, Chloe pressed both hands over her mouth to keep from crying out, as another contraction rolled through her. The tall man's eyes narrowed, but he stepped back first. "If she comes by, tell her we're looking." Ryan held the door steady. "If she comes by, I'll tell her not to travel with men who smell like trouble." The scarred man's face twisted, but the taller one caught his sleeve. They retreated to the SUV, leaving tire tracks and suspicion behind them. Ryan waited until the headlights dipped back into the trees, then shut and bolted the door. He turned just as Chloe gasped, her body arching under the blanket, her face wet with tears she had been too proud to release before. "Ryan," she whispered, terror breaking through every wall she had left. "Something's wrong. I think my water broke." For the next hours, the cabin ceased to be a hiding place and became a battlefield of another kind. Ryan moved Chloe to the heavy wooden dining table because it was the cleanest raised surface he had. He washed his hands until the water ran icy and clear, then poured boiled water into a basin, laid out clean towels, bandages, scissors, and every medical supply he had stored for emergencies he had hoped would never come. Chloe was weak from blood loss and shock, but she listened to every instruction, gripping the table's edge while contractions tore through her with increasing force. She was not the hardened woman some might imagine beside a biker leader. She was frightened, tender, and fiercely protective, apologizing once for bleeding on Ryan's floor until he told her that floors were easier to fix than mothers. Between contractions, Chloe told him more. Tommy Callahan had enemies from a criminal crew that had been pushed out of northern routes months earlier. They had threatened him, but he had believed they would come for him directly. Chloe had begged him to let her keep one quiet doctor's appointment without escorts because she was tired of living like a queen in a fortress and a prisoner in every grocery aisle. Her voice cracked when she said it. Ryan understood the guilt underneath. Good people often blamed themselves for evil choosing them, as if innocence had somehow opened the door. He kept his voice steady and gave her small tasks. "Breathe, squeeze this towel. Look at Max. Stay with me." Max remained near her head, letting Chloe clutch the thick fur at his neck when the pain became unbearable. The old warrior dog endured it with solemn patience, though once he glanced at Ryan, as if asking whether humans always made puppies in such dramatic fashion. The storm outside slowly began to weaken, but inside the cabin time became strange. The clock on the wall ticked like a hammer. The fire burned low, then high again. Chloe screamed into a folded towel when the pain peaked, and Ryan spoke to her with the calm authority of a man who had guided others back from the edge. He had not delivered many babies, but he had seen life fight its way into the world under worse ceilings than this. When panic rose in him, he buried it where he had buried fear for years. This child did not care about gangs, revenge, roadblocks, or the sins of grown men. This child only wanted to live. Just before dawn, when the last of the storm dragged itself across the mountains and a gray light began to gather behind the windows. Chloe gave one final exhausted push. For one terrible second, there was only silence. Ryan's heart stopped inside his chest. Then a sharp, angry newborn cry filled the cabin. Small but mighty, thin as a silver bell, and strong enough to make Chloe sob. Ryan wrapped the tiny boy in a warm towel and placed him carefully against his mother's chest. Chloe bowed over him, shaking, whispering words Ryan could not fully understand, except for one repeated phrase. "Thank you, God." Max lowered his head beside the baby and sniffed gently, then looked at Ryan with solemn approval, as if deciding the strange, hairless pup could stay. Ryan allowed himself one breath of relief. Chloe was alive. The baby was alive. The wound in her side had been cleaned and bandaged, and though she needed a hospital badly, the worst of the bleeding had slowed. For a few fragile minutes, the cabin felt holy, as if heaven had leaned down through the smoke and snow to warm its hands by Ryan's fire. Then the coffee cups on the shelf began to tremble. At first, Ryan thought it was the wind returning, but the storm had nearly passed. The vibration deepened through the floorboards, growing into a steady rumble that made Max spring to his feet. Ryan crossed to the covered window and pulled the blanket aside just enough to see the mountain road below. Through the pale dawn, the forest filled with headlights. Not two this time, but hundreds. A river of motorcycles climbing toward the cabin. The mountains were still wrapped in the fading remains of the storm when Ryan Carter pulled the curtain aside and looked down toward the valley. What he saw would have unsettled almost anyone else. The narrow road leading toward the cabin had become a river of headlights stretching through the snow-covered forest. Hundreds of motorcycles climbed the mountain in long, organized lines, their engines merging into a deep, rolling thunder that shook the frozen ground beneath the cabin. Behind Ryan, Chloe held her newborn son against her chest while fighting exhaustion. Her face remained pale from blood loss, and dark circles framed eyes that had not truly rested in nearly 24 hours. Yet the fear she felt now was different from the fear that had haunted her throughout the night. The men approaching were not strangers. They belonged to her husband. Ryan studied the convoy carefully. Years spent as a Navy SEAL had trained him to evaluate situations without allowing emotion to cloud judgment. He was not intimidated by numbers, but he understood what numbers represented. 700 bikers gathering on a remote mountain meant one thing. Somebody believed something terrible had happened. He glanced toward Chloe, who looked as though she wanted to stand and run to the door, while simultaneously hiding beneath every blanket in the cabin. The contradiction made perfect sense. She knew her husband loved her. She also knew Tommy Callahan's greatest strength and greatest weakness were often the same thing. When Tommy believed someone he loved was in danger, reason became secondary. The motorcycles finally filled the clearing surrounding the cabin. Snow continued drifting across leather jackets, chrome handlebars, and rows of idling engines. One by one, the riders shut down their motorcycles until a strange silence settled over the mountain. Hundreds of men stood waiting, watching the cabin. The stillness somehow felt more dangerous than the noise had. Max remained beside the front door, his ears upright and his muscular body alert. The German Shepherd had protected Ryan through situations far more violent than this, but even he seemed to recognize that something significant was unfolding. Then Ryan saw the man walking through the crowd. Tommy Callahan moved with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. At 42, he possessed the rugged appearance of a man who had spent most of his life outdoors. He stood over 6 feet tall with broad shoulders and powerful arms built through years of physical labor rather than gym memberships. His dark hair showed streaks of gray around the temples, while a thick beard framed a face marked by both authority and fatigue. Deep lines around his eyes suggested countless sleepless nights carrying responsibilities that most people would never understand. Stories about Tommy varied depending on who was telling them. Some viewed him as a criminal leader. Others described him as a fiercely loyal protector who would sacrifice everything for his people. Looking at him now, Ryan saw only a husband who had spent an entire night believing his pregnant wife might be dead. Tommy stopped at the bottom of the porch steps and stared directly at Ryan. Neither man spoke immediately. They simply measured each other. Ryan saw grief, anger, fear, and determination battling behind Tommy's eyes. Tommy saw a calm stranger standing alone between him and the answers he desperately needed. The tension spread through the crowd like an electrical current. "My wife's emergency signal stopped here," Tommy finally said. Ryan nodded once. "It did." The simple answer seemed to unsettle Tommy more than an argument would have. Before he could speak again, movement behind the bikers drew Ryan's attention. Several men were dragging a battered figure through the snow. The prisoner's face was swollen and bruised, but Ryan immediately recognized him as the tall man who had come to the cabin during the night pretending to search for a missing woman. The man could barely stand. Blood stained his collar, and one eye had swollen completely shut. Tommy never looked away from Ryan. "We found him 3 miles down the mountain," he said. "He says he followed Chloe here." The prisoner's expression suddenly changed. Ryan recognized desperation when he saw it. Desperate people often became dangerous because they were willing to say anything if it might save their lives. The man pointed a shaking finger toward Ryan. "He killed her," he shouted. "We saw her come here. We heard her screaming. The old man killed her and took the baby." The accusation exploded through the crowd. Several bikers stepped forward. Others cursed loudly. Hands moved toward knives, pistols, and weapons, hidden beneath heavy coats. Tommy remained motionless, but something dark passed through his eyes. For a moment, Ryan thought the man might actually believe it. Not because the story made sense, but because grief often clung to the first explanation it found. Ryan understood the emotion. During his military years, he had watched good people make terrible decisions while searching for someone to blame. Max stepped onto the porch beside Ryan. The German Shepherd's presence drew attention from several bikers. The dog did not bark or growl. He simply stood there, watching. The calm confidence in the animal somehow mirrored Ryan's own demeanor. Neither appeared frightened despite the overwhelming odds surrounding them. Tommy slowly climbed the porch steps. The crowd fell silent. Only the wind remained. When Tommy reached the top step, he stood face to face with Ryan. "If my wife is dead," he said quietly, "nothing on this mountain will survive today." Ryan never looked away. "Then it's a good thing she's alive." The words struck Tommy like a physical blow. For a second, he simply stared. Then he shook his head. "No." Ryan's expression remained unchanged. "Your son is alive, too." Tommy's breathing became uneven. Behind him, the bikers exchanged confused looks. The battered prisoner suddenly began shouting again, trying desperately to regain control of the situation, insisting Ryan was lying, insisting everyone inside the cabin was already dead. The noise spread uncertainty through the crowd. Some wanted to believe him. Others wanted to believe Ryan. No one knew the truth. Then the front door opened behind Ryan. Every head turned. Chloe stood in the doorway, wrapped in blankets. Her blonde hair fell loosely around her shoulders, and exhaustion showed in every movement she made. Yet she remained standing. In her arms rested a tiny newborn child, bundled against the cold. For several seconds, nobody moved. Hundreds of bikers stared at the impossible sight before them. Tommy looked as though the world had stopped spinning. "Tommy," Chloe whispered. His knees nearly gave way. The fear that had consumed him all night disappeared at once, replaced by overwhelming relief. Tears filled his eyes before he could stop them. The crowd remained silent, as he climbed the final step and crossed the porch. Chloe placed the baby carefully into his arms. The enormous biker who commanded hundreds of hardened men suddenly looked like nothing more than a father holding his child for the first time. The newborn opened his tiny hand and wrapped his fingers around Tommy's thumb. Tommy broke. Tears rolled freely down his face. For several moments he could not speak. When he finally looked toward Ryan, gratitude and disbelief battled across his features. Everything he had feared during the long night had been wrong. His wife was alive. His son was alive. The stranger standing before him had saved both. Without warning, Tommy lowered himself onto one knee in the snow-covered porch. The entire crowd stared. 700 bikers watched their leader bow his head toward the former Navy SEAL who had protected his family. "You saved them," Tommy said quietly. Ryan looked beyond the crowd toward the distant mountains. The real danger was not standing on his property. It was still out there. The celebration that followed Tommy Callahan's reunion with his wife lasted only a few minutes before reality returned. Hundreds of bikers still occupied the snowy clearing around Ryan Carter's cabin, but the mood had changed completely. The tension that had nearly exploded into violence was gone, replaced by relief, gratitude, and exhaustion. Chloe remained inside near the fireplace with her newborn son sleeping peacefully against her chest. Every few minutes she glanced toward the door, as if she still expected the nightmare to return. Ryan understood that feeling. Some fears survived long after the danger itself had passed. Tommy sat quietly beside his wife for almost an hour. During that time, he barely spoke. He simply watched Chloe and the baby, occasionally touching the child's tiny hand, as if reassuring himself that both of them were real. The hardened biker leader, who had terrified rivals across several states, looked nothing like the stories people told about him. Ryan had learned long ago that every person carried multiple versions of themselves. A soldier could become a father. A feared leader could become a frightened husband. Most people only saw whichever version happened to be standing in front of them. Outside the cabin, Max moved among the bikers without fear. The German Shepherd seemed strangely comfortable, despite being surrounded by hundreds of strangers. Several riders offered him pieces of jerky, while others cautiously scratched behind his ears. Max accepted the attention with the dignified tolerance of an old king inspecting loyal subjects. More than one biker laughed when the dog ignored them completely and returned to sit beside Ryan. Loyalty, after all, could not be bribed with snacks. Late that morning, Tommy finally stepped outside and joined Ryan on the porch. The snowstorm had passed, leaving the mountains bright beneath clear winter sunlight. For a few moments, neither man spoke. Both simply looked across the valley below. It was Tommy who eventually broke the silence. "They weren't trying to kill Chloe because of me." Ryan turned slightly. "What do you mean?" Tommy rubbed a hand across his beard. "The people who attacked her could have come after me directly. They've tried before." His voice carried none of the pride some men attached to danger. Instead, it sounded tired. "This was different. They wanted my son dead, before he was even born." The statement lingered between them. Ryan had reached the same conclusion hours earlier. Whoever planned the attack had not been interested in intimidation. They wanted emotional devastation. They wanted a message written in blood. Before either man could continue, a group of bikers approached the cabin, dragging the captured attacker from earlier. The prisoner's condition had worsened. His expensive coat was torn, his face bruised, and fear had completely replaced the false confidence he displayed during the night. Ryan noticed something important immediately. The man was not afraid of Tommy. He was afraid of someone else. Tommy noticed it too. The biker leader crouched in front of him. "Tell me who ordered the attack." The prisoner shook his head. Tommy asked again. The man remained silent. Then something unexpected happened. Ryan stepped forward. The former Navy SEAL had spent years conducting interrogations in places far removed from Montana. He understood human behavior, and he understood fear. Most importantly, he understood when somebody was protecting information not because they were loyal, but because they were terrified. Ryan knelt beside the prisoner. "You think Tommy is the most dangerous person in your life," he said calmly. "But you're scared of the man who hired you." The prisoner's eyes widened. That reaction alone revealed enough. Ryan continued speaking quietly. "You don't believe you'll survive if you talk." Several bikers exchanged surprised looks. The man swallowed hard. For the first time, he seemed willing to listen. "What makes you think he'll let you live anyway?" Ryan asked. The question landed harder than any threat. The prisoner stared at the snow beneath his feet. A long silence followed. Finally, he spoke. "His name is Victor Rains." Nobody recognized the name. Tommy frowned. Ryan remained silent. The prisoner continued. "Most people don't know him. That's how he likes it." Over the next several minutes, a disturbing picture emerged. Victor Rains was not a biker, cartel leader, or gang boss. He was a wealthy businessman who operated through layers of intermediaries. Publicly, he owned transportation companies, warehouses, and logistics firms across multiple states. Privately, he controlled criminal operations worth millions. Unlike ordinary criminals, Victor rarely appeared anywhere connected to his crimes. He preferred distance. He preferred other people taking risks while he collected rewards. According to the prisoner, Victor believed Tommy's growing influence threatened several profitable smuggling routes. Attacking Tommy directly might start a war. Destroying his family would achieve the same goal while sending a stronger message. When the explanation ended, silence settled over the gathering. Even Tommy appeared shaken. This was no longer about rivalry. This was attempted murder. Inside the cabin, Chloe overheard enough to understand what was happening. The color drained from her face. She looked down at her sleeping son and suddenly understood something terrifying. The attack had not failed because the killers showed mercy. The attack had failed because she survived. If Victor Rains truly wanted the child dead, the threat remained alive. Tommy immediately proposed retaliation. Many of the bikers supported the idea. Several volunteered to leave within the hour. Ryan rejected the suggestion instantly. "You don't even know where he is." Tommy looked irritated. "We'll find him." "And then what?" Ryan asked. "Start shooting people until someone gives you a name?" The question silenced the group. Ryan understood their anger. In different circumstances, he might have shared it. But anger rarely produced good decisions. It produced mistakes. For the next hour, Ryan explained his reasoning. They needed information before action. They needed locations, financial records, communication networks, and evidence. Most importantly, they needed to understand how large Victor's operation really was. Men like Victor Rains survived because people reacted emotionally while they planned strategically. To Ryan's surprise, Tommy listened. Perhaps becoming a father only hours earlier had changed something inside him. Perhaps seeing Chloe and the baby alive had reminded him what was truly important. Whatever the reason, he agreed. By mid-afternoon, assignments were already being organized. Some bikers would monitor transportation depots linked to Victor's businesses. Others would gather information from contacts across neighboring states. A smaller group would remain behind to protect Chloe and the baby. Ryan had no intention of leading a biker army, but he was willing to help stop a man who targeted mothers and children. As the winter sun began sinking toward the mountains, Max suddenly rose from his place near the fireplace. The German Shepherd walked toward the cabin door and stared outside. Ryan immediately noticed the change. Max only behaved that way when something unusual caught his attention. Ryan stepped onto the porch. In the distance, beyond the main road and far below the cabin, a single black SUV sat parked beside a line of trees. It had not been there earlier. The vehicle remained motionless, watching, waiting. Ryan's instincts immediately awakened. Whoever sat inside already knew Chloe had survived. The black SUV remained parked below the mountain for less than 10 minutes before disappearing into the trees. But that brief sighting changed everything. Ryan Carter stood on the porch long after the vehicle vanished, watching the empty road while Max sat beside him. The German shepherd's ears remained forward, his attention fixed on the valley below. Experience had taught Ryan that danger rarely announced itself twice. Whoever had been inside that SUV had not come to observe scenery. They had come to confirm something. More importantly, they had left without approaching the cabin. That meant they had already learned what they needed to know. Inside, Chloe slept for the first time since the accident. The newborn boy rested in a handmade cradle one of the bikers had assembled from spare lumber found in Ryan's shed. Watching them together reminded Ryan what was truly at stake. This was no longer about biker rivalries, criminal empires, or personal pride. A mother and child had been marked for death by people who viewed human lives as business obstacles. Ryan had spent enough years confronting evil to recognize its patterns. Men like Victor Raines never stopped simply because a plan failed. They adapted and tried again. During the next 2 days, information began flowing toward the cabin from every direction. Tommy Callahan's network stretched far beyond Montana. Bikers from neighboring states called with reports, photographs, license plate numbers, and locations connected to Victor's transportation companies. Ryan organized the information with the discipline he had learned during military operations. Maps covered the cabin walls. Routes were marked. Timelines were created. Patterns slowly emerged. Victor Raines appeared to be using legitimate shipping businesses as cover for moving illegal cargo through multiple states. The operation was larger than anyone initially suspected. One of the most important discoveries came from a woman named Rebecca Hayes, a 56-year-old forensic accountant who had spent 3 decades investigating financial fraud before retiring. Rebecca was tall and slender, with silver blonde hair coiffed neatly at shoulder length, intelligent green eyes, and the calm confidence of someone who trusted numbers more than people. Tommy had known her family for years and persuaded her to review several suspicious corporate records connected to Victor's companies. Within 48 hours, she identified shell corporations, hidden ownership structures, and millions of dollars flowing through accounts that should not have existed. Her findings transformed vague suspicions into something authorities could eventually prosecute. Ryan's plan remained simple: gather evidence, follow the money, expose the network. Yet the enemy moved faster than expected. 3 nights after the SUV appeared near the mountain, Max woke Ryan shortly before midnight. The dog did not bark. He simply nudged Ryan awake and moved toward the window. That behavior alone was enough. Ryan immediately rose from bed and looked outside. Snow reflected faint moonlight across the clearing. Everything appeared normal at first glance. Then he noticed movement near the tree line. Several figures. Watching. Waiting. Ryan quietly alerted Tommy and the security teams positioned around the property. Within minutes, dozens of bikers had established observation positions. Nobody fired. Nobody rushed forward. Ryan refused to repeat the mistakes their enemies expected. Instead, they watched. The intruders eventually retreated, but not before leaving something behind. The following morning, one of the guards discovered a package placed beside the access road. Inside rested a single photograph. Chloe, the newborn, taken the previous afternoon. The message was unmistakable. Victor's people had gotten close enough to photograph the baby. Fear swept through the cabin like a winter draft. Chloe tried to hide it, but Ryan noticed her hands trembling when she held her son. Tommy reacted with visible fury. Every protective instinct inside him demanded immediate retaliation. Yet this time, he controlled himself. Fatherhood had changed him. The old Tommy might have launched a war without thinking. The new Tommy looked at his sleeping child and listened when Ryan advised patience. That patience paid off. Less than 24 hours later, one of Victor's transportation managers made a mistake. A biker working at a fuel depot recognized a truck linked to Rebecca's financial investigation. The vehicle traveled to a warehouse complex outside Billings that officially stored agricultural equipment. Surveillance teams documented unusual nighttime activity, heavily armed guards, and unregistered vehicles entering through rear access roads. Photographs, video recordings, and financial records all pointed toward the same conclusion. Victor's hidden operation had finally been located. Ryan organized the response carefully. There would be no vigilante assault, no revenge mission, no armed biker raid. Instead, every piece of evidence collected over the previous days was assembled into a comprehensive package. Rebecca's financial records, surveillance photographs, truck registrations, communication logs, witness statements, everything. Tommy initially struggled with the decision. "You're telling me after everything they've done, we just hand this over?" Ryan looked directly at him. "No. I'm telling you we make sure they never do it to another family." The difference mattered. Late the following afternoon, Ryan contacted a former federal investigator named Daniel Mercer. Daniel was 60 years old, broad-shouldered despite his age, with short gray hair, sharp blue eyes, and a reputation for integrity that had survived decades in law enforcement. Years earlier, Daniel and Ryan had worked together during an interstate trafficking investigation. Trust between them had been earned through difficult circumstances, not casual friendship. Daniel reviewed the evidence. Then he called back 3 hours later. His first words were simple: "This is enough." The federal response moved quickly. Within 48 hours, multiple warrants were approved. Investigators coordinated operations across several locations simultaneously. Warehouses were searched. Corporate records were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. Transportation facilities were raided. The scale of Victor's organization proved even larger than expected, but the evidence collected around Ryan's cabin connected the pieces together. Victor Raines was arrested while attempting to board a private aircraft. The news reached the cabin shortly after sunrise. Nobody celebrated immediately. The relief arrived gradually. For Chloe, it came when she realized nobody was watching the road anymore. For Tommy, it came when he held his son without expecting violence to interrupt the moment. For Ryan, it arrived while standing on the porch beside Max as sunlight illuminated the mountains. The cabin looked exactly as it had before the storm. The trees remained unchanged. Snow still covered the valley. Yet everything felt different. A week later, most of the bikers finally departed. The mountain slowly returned to silence. Before leaving, Tommy walked across the clearing carrying his son in his arms. Chloe followed beside him, healthier now, color returning to her face with each passing day. Neither seemed eager to say goodbye. "You saved my family," Tommy said. Ryan shook his head. "You saved them, too. You just needed the chance." Tommy smiled faintly. Maybe that was true. Maybe becoming a father had forced him to become something more than the man he used to be. After they left, Ryan watched their vehicles disappear down the mountain road. Max settled beside him on the porch, satisfied that the strange, fragile little human he had guarded since birth would be safe. The wind moved gently through the pines. For the first time in many days, there were no threats, no engines, and no distant headlights. Only peace. And sometimes, Ryan reflected, peace was the greatest victory a man could ever earn. Sometimes miracles don't arrive with flashing lights or grand signs from heaven. Sometimes they arrive during the darkest storm of your life, through the hands of a stranger willing to help, the loyalty of a faithful dog, or the courage of a mother refusing to give up on her child. Ryan believed he had left his purpose behind when he walked away from his old life. Chloe believed her family had been marked for tragedy. Tommy believed he was about to lose everything he loved. Yet God had a different plan. In a small cabin hidden in the Montana mountains, a frightened mother survived. A baby was born, a family was reunited, and evil was brought into the light. Life often feels the same way for many of us. We face storms we never expected, battles we never chose, and moments when hope seems impossibly far away. But this story reminds us that even when we cannot see the path ahead, God may already be working through people, circumstances, and opportunities we have not yet recognized. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need a little hope today. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from and what part of this story meant the most to you. And if you enjoy stories about faith, courage, loyalty, and second chances, please subscribe to the channel and join our growing family. May God bless you, protect your loved ones, bring peace to your home, strength to your heart, and light to every road you travel. Amen.